Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time you are tuning in. Welcome to Homesteading and Gardening in the Suburbs. I'm Emma from Misfit Gardening, and thank you for being so patient with me and letting me have some time to get things planted here on the homestead. So my apologies for no podcast episode last week, and I did let some folks know who are in the Facebook group that there would not be a podcast episode last week, and I spent the last weekend in the pouring rain planting celery, celeriac, leeks, onions, cabbages, kale, and an apple tree. There was so much that needed to be done, and I did not have a lot of time during the week from work, so I really needed to take that time just to get things done on the homestead. So I appreciate you joining me today, especially when there was no episode last week. So I wanted to kind of let you know that, we've been really working very hard to finish up the coop on the homestead. The storm that we had really pushed us to the limit since we have the chickies on the way in a few days. We've actually got our meat birds coming, and also a couple of layers first, and then later on in the summer we're going to be having the rest of the layers and some dual purpose birds on the way from a different hatchery. This is actually my first time having chicks arrive by mail from the hatchery. Previously we'd gotten them from a farm ranch store that was relatively close to where we lived when we were back in Utah, and it was kind of a nice way to do it because I was able to see the chicks. I could check them over before, getting them. And we lost one, the first time that we got chicks. There was one that just, ended up, dying, unfortunately. But this is kind of the first time I've done it, by mail order, and kind of everything I've been talking about with other people who have chickens that come from a hatchery is, you expect some that are not going to make it. It's quite stressful, obviously, being shipped in a box. So we're going to see how this works, especially since now I've been fallen definitely into I don't want to say a chicken rabbit hole because you wouldn't get a chicken in a rabbit hole, but I've definitely been learning a lot about chickens on a slightly larger scale. And there is a big difference, where you buy your chickens from. There's a big difference in cost. There's also a big difference in the varieties that are available or the breeds that are available, as well as the minimum order quantity, we'll say. And if I still lived in the suburbs, I would be struggling because we've got chickens arriving from one hatchery where there was a 15 chicken order minimum for shipping. So I was trying to combine the layers that I wanted with the meat birds that we wanted. And this is going to be our first time predominantly having specialized breeds for meat birds. Before we just had dual purpose birds. So this is going to be a bit of a learning curve for us. But yeah, one hatchery had 15 chicken minimum order. Another one had 6, which would have worked, but then there was a small shipment fee that was on top of that. And that hatchery was one that actually one of our local farmers that we were part of their CSA last year, it was one that they recommended and they'd gotten birds from before. So it was a hatchery that I had been looking at too. So we'd heard some good things about them locally, so we decided to give those a whirl. But then as I was doing research about different breeds that I wanted, believe me, I've fallen into the weird and wonderful world of chicken breeding, but that is a podcast episode for another day. But I did find another hatchery where they had a minimum of 3 chicks to order. So it is definitely worth doing some research and really kind of sitting down and thinking, what is it that you're wanting, and getting an order in early. So right now we've got some that are coming in May, and then the rest aren't coming until June or July. Might be July. So we've got this huge, it's July, we've got this long wait until the rest of our layers show up. And that's just because we couldn't get shipment dates for the breeds that we wanted that were really going to work. Whereas if we'd been a lot more prepared and ordered them early, then we would have obviously gotten the breeds that we wanted early. So just as one would do with the garden, we definitely want to be thinking about what we're going to be ordering for chickens. And like I said, this year is going to be a bit of an experimental year. We'll say there's going to be a lot of learning that we're going to be doing with the meat birds, and we're going to find out like which type of meat birds suit our family the best. I don't eat meat, but my husband and my stepson do. So, trying to find out like which birds they preferred, which birds had a better time on the pasture, which birds they preferred to eat, which ones had, kind of a better feed to growth ratios. There's a few things that we're going to be trying to figure out as we go through. So this is going to be kind of interesting. And one of the things that I found during my research into chickens is that there's a big difference between different hatcheries and what they have available. So there's one hatchery that had, a lot more kind of dual purpose birds or meat birds. And then there was another one that has, a lot more, I like to call them boutique birds, but they're also known as designer chicken breeds, as well as heritage breeds. And some of the kind of newer hybrid birds that lay coloured eggs, and hybrids, they're not genetically modified or anything like that when it comes to chickens. It's just a cross of 2 different breeds that produces a first generation that is a hybrid. So you'll often have, kind of like you do in the plant world, there's a lot more kind of vigor to these hybrid birds. They grow faster or they produce more. So, there's a lot of kind of interest around, breeding varieties that are producing well for meat, but breeding varieties that are doing well on pasture and foraging versus, being stuck in a pen. There's breeding for different coloured eggs or egg production. There's a lot of things that we can look at. And as we are looking at our homestead as a whole and how we can have this self-sufficient homestead, what are the things that we can do to, help this kind of be a sustaining type of enterprise? And I know I talked previously about, how chickens fit into our overall homestead plan and the composting and all that kind of stuff. But just generally, like how can our chickens, not only feed us, but how can we help to feed them? And that kind of got me thinking about how to save money on feeding chickens. And that kind of leads me to the first thing, which is really do some research. And, some of this was kind of coming through me thinking with my permaculture design brain and thinking about the homestead as a whole, but also like from a need perspective, because we've got a lot of building projects going on around the homestead. We've been building the coop for a long time, but also there's a lot of like super expensive things that need to be done on the homestead. Like we've got to completely gut a room, we've got to redo the floor. I'm a big girl and there's some really dodgy floorboards, and I'm kind of worried, like, is today going to be the day when I end up in the basement through the flooring? And it would probably be the day where I decide to be doing a bit more of a vigorous workout or something. I'm going to be firing up a workout DVD and end up through the floor, which is not where I want to be. But there's a lot that needs to be done there, and it's expensive to be having to redoing a floor, but not just the floor needs doing, the walls need doing, the ceiling needs doing, we've got rewiring that needs doing, the really fun and expensive stuff. So that's kind of a priority for the house, for us. And although she's been standing for over 200 years, we want her to be the best that she can be, and help her stand for another 200 or 300 more. So thinking about those things that need to be done, how can we save money on chicken feed? And we are using certified organic feed, and that isn't cheap. And I can say that I have seen a huge difference in prices. I mean, I've seen things about $30, maybe about $27 for 23 pounds, up to $90 for 43 pounds. I've seen big differences in the nutritional content of these feeds, and it really depends on where you purchase from too. So I was looking at ordering online. I was looking at getting from a local farm supply chain store that also sells chicks, which you probably know. I've also looked at local feed stores, like the ones within the town or a town over, and they don't have organic feed. So my first tip is definitely to shop around, and because I've been doing some research way before the chicks were even arriving, I managed to find 50-pound sacks of certified organic feed that are between sort of $27 and $34. And that's a couple of towns over. Luckily, we can run errands like getting groceries nearby too. So it's not just a trip where we're going out to get the feed. We can combine that with other things that need to be done. So we could save more money by buying conventional feed and grain, but since I grow my food organically here on the homestead, I want my chickens to have organic feed too. And honestly, I really want to support those farmers who have chosen to grow organic, because they're making a choice to avoid using herbicides and pesticides and GMOs, because those things are not allowed for certified organic. And I know how much paperwork and records that they have to keep to go through that process. So where I can, I choose organic. And that's something that, I'm striving to do, is to look at, can I move from being a homesteader to a farmer, and can I be an organic farmer in doing that? So I could switch to conventionally grown feed, and I could save more money too, because organic feed is anywhere from 10% more to 25 or even 50% more, depending on the feed that you're looking at. So there's a huge difference in cost there. But remember that cheaper isn't always better. So pay attention to what's on the labels of the feed. Are you getting enough nutrients for your birds? Are you getting the right type of feed? If you're needing a grower feed for your meat birds versus a chick starter for your chicks versus a layer feed for your layers, they're all different, and you want to give your chickens the best quality feed that you can afford, whether it's conventionally grown or organic. And yes, you can definitely save money by buying feed in bulk, but not everyone has got the storage for a ton of chicken feed, like a pallet worth of feed. And just like any food, it's going to lose nutrients over time. Fresher is better. And if you've got an entire pallet worth of feed that you're trying to figure out how to keep the critters off it, the rain off it, and everything else, it can be more of a hassle. Now, if you've got a number of friends who've also got chickens, and you could all chip in together to get a pallet of feed and then split it all up between you, then yeah, that's definitely going to be saving money. But I know a lot of you have not got a lot of like-minded homesteading type of friends that are looking to do this, so that can be kind of difficult. So there's some other options that we can look at for saving money on feed. So let's talk about fermenting, because I can't do a podcast about lowering feed costs for chickens without talking about fermenting the grains. We did that with our backyard flock, and I'll be starting my fermented feed the day before the chicks are scheduled to ship, so the feed is ready to go when the chickies arrive. I'm not going to spend too much time on the benefits of fermenting chicken feed because there's folks out there that are more knowledgeable than I on the matter that you can read about, but it's meant to release a lot more nutrients for your birds. Some chicken keepers feed fermented feed all the time. Others do a day on fermented, then a couple of days with regular grains or feed, and then back to fermented. Some folks have both available at the same time. Whatever works for you. We ferment quite a lot. On our homestead, from sauerkraut and kimchi to brewing beer, there's something bubbling at my house all the time. So fermenting some chicken feed in a gallon-sized glass jar is easy peasy for me to do. Most chicken feed fermenters seem to recommend that no more than 3 days fermenting is the sweet spot in warm weather. After 3 days, the feed becomes unpalatable for the chickens. You're looking for some bubbling on the surface. Bubbles mean fermenting. And since fermenting is unlocking more nutrients to the birds, they tend to eat a bit less than they would with the unfermented grain. So that's going to help you stretch out your feed by as much as 30% apparently. And that's kind of exciting if you add that into foraging, which we'll talk about in a minute or two. But to ferment, you basically cover the chicken feed with water so that there's at least an inch of water above the level of the feed. You want to check that there's always at least an inch of water above that line of feed. Some grains are going to soak up the water. I'm looking at you, oats and barley. You want to be covering that container with something breathable. But also it's a really good idea before you start covering everything up is when you put that feed in and you cover it with water, like leave it for about an hour and a half and come and take a look again and top it up with a bit more water just in case. Like, I don't know if you eat oatmeal. I eat oatmeal every day, and I've kind of figured it out now about like how much water I need on top of my oats before, you know, I put it in the microwave, and you know, I avoid having an eruption of, you know, super hot oatmeal out of the bowl, but also have enough water so it's not, you know, completely stuck inside the bowl and not going to move anywhere, you know, because it soaks up so much water. So definitely let it sit, let it stand for a bit, come back in an hour and add a bit more water if needed. But you want to cover the opening of the container. I like to use a jar. Like I said, I've got like these, you know, big gallon jars that used to be part of old chicken waterers from what was the old commercial barn for chickens that was on the property that since got torn down. We got rid of a bunch of them, shared them locally, but we kept a few. So I like to use those, and I can stagger them or stagger my ferments as I'm going through that, which kind of makes it easy. But you know, you could use like a huge pickle jar or something like that. Some people use buckets. Some people will ferment enough for a few days. It's just whatever works for you. I like to use it as smaller quantities because then I've got better control. So when you're covering your containers, you want it to be something breathable, like a tea towel or a clean rag from an old t-shirt, some cheesecloth maybe, or how about that really ugly fabric that's in your quilting stash that you just can't give away. You know, you want to use something like that, something that's breathable, and then you can use an elastic band, or you can tie the cloth over that opening with some string or yarn or a clean shoelace. You get the idea, right? Use it up, wear it out, make it do without. That is definitely our mantra on the homestead. But every day you want to be stirring that feed up to get some oxygen from the air into the feed, and that's going to help that fermentation process move a bit faster. It's an opportunity for you to check it for signs of mold or spoilage on the surface. If in doubt and you're seeing mold on there, just if in doubt, throw it out. Do not give it to your chickens, because moldy food and stuff can kill your chickens. So it's good practice to check it. If it smells a bit off and you're not sure, throw it out. Don't give it to your chickens. And, if you've got a friend who has chickens and ferments the feed, see if you can help them make it. Or see if you can, help feed the chickens or smell it and, kind of get a feel for what that should smell like or what it should look like or any signs of it going bad. The internet's great. There's lots of pictures and videos of stuff and how to do things now, so you can take a look and see is this something that is a bit of a problem and something that you should be concerned about. Like if you've ever brewed kombucha, for example, there's some really great information available on, this is something that you should definitely get rid of the whole batch and start again, versus something like, oh no, this is normal. So do your research beforehand. Now let's talk about free ranging and getting your chickens onto pasture or an untreated lawn in your backyard is another way to reduce feed. You're encouraging your flock to forage and hunt for bugs or plants that they can fill up on before they're given their ration of feed. You don't want to be skipping on giving your chickens grit for them to fill their crop, because it's the grit that's going to help grind up the grasses and grains and whatever else they find. In the fall, my flock will be going into the homestead garden. They're going to help remove those pesky pests that are planning on overwintering in the soil. But for the most part, they're going to be out on the grass and on the pasture. And not all chickens are suited to a life as a free-ranging forager. Some birds are more successful than others, and I've definitely seen that the dual purpose or heritage breeds seem to be much better at it in my experience. But you're going to get, a heritage breed that or a chicken that is a heritage breed that prefers to be hanging around the feeder all the time and doesn't really like going out. And then again, you might also get a hybrid bird that is super great at foraging, and it might be running around chasing down a cricket like a T-Rex with rocket shoes. It might be really good. Generally though, I like to have my birds out on grass. It helps bust boredom and problems in a small coop, which most of you are going to be facing if you have a small backyard, is having a small coop. I might be building another hoop coop / overwintering mobile greenhouse, because mine does double duty I want a second one really for the layers, so I can split up my chickens and give everybody a bit more room to move about, because I don't want to be having them fully free ranging without having some level of protection. There's just too many predators out here. I've got so many hawks, eagles, big birds of prey that are kicking about on a regular basis on my homestead, as well as, the four-legged furry kind of critters that are all around in the, the woods and stuff next to my homestead. So I want to make sure that I can give my flock the opportunity to get out onto the grass and, really kind of exhibit those normal chicken behaviors, but, scratching and pecking at things. Maybe they might be a little bit more into the woodlands one day, and maybe it's on, the green pasture the next day, just kind of switch things up a bit, so it helps bust the boredom, but also gives them a variety of things to peck at and try. There's obviously going to be different bugs for them to eat in the grasses versus those that are kind of more by the forest. So it's using more of the space that I have on the property, because right now I've got a very limited area where I could be growing food in terms of my fruit and vegetable garden, because of the shading from the trees at either side. But that doesn't mean that I can't put it to use in producing food in a different way, and the chickens in pens or in the hoop coop is one way that I can do that. Now, the next thing is kitchen scraps, and I feel very lucky to have neighbours who are willing to give us kitchen scraps in exchange for eggs. If I was wanting to sell eggs or chickens as organic, then I wouldn't be able to do this because everything that touches their beaks as feed must be certified organic. But I'm not selling and I'm not certified organic, so having the kitchen scraps is going to be a big help to reduce the feed costs. Some people even ask local grocery stores, local restaurants, local coffee shops and stuff if they can have like some of the food scraps that they're going to be throwing out that they can't use. And you might be surprised at how willing a business is to give those things to you, or a very reduced cost in doing that. So, it's not going to work for everybody and you might get a lot more no's, but then you might hit up a real good winner there. So, there's lots of really good things that you can be giving your birds from the kitchen, things like leafy greens that are full of calcium for the laying hens, for example. But there's also things that you can't give to your chickens, like avocado, chocolate, citrus fruits, dry beans, and there's a whole heap of other things too. But there's plenty of things that you can give to your chickens. And in the permaculture world of chicken keeping, the compost bin is usually in the chicken run or the pen so that birds can scratch through the food scraps, turning things over to add in air and, adding their own personal manure as they go. So you're giving your chickens something to do by having something that they can scratch through and peck at and eat and stuff. But it's also turning it into this wonderful compost that you can then use in the garden. Now, our last flock of hens absolutely loved homebrew day. They would line up like on the edge of the fence that we had, because they had like a little open run area, and they would like all hop up onto the fence. And they would be like staring you down, like as, all the brewing kits got pulled out. And they would go nuts for the spent grains from the mash tun. And they got to enjoy all of that after sparging. So if you're a home brewer and you've been wondering, how can I get rid of this 10 pounds of grain that I have from my all grain brewing kit that I've just made or whatever, then maybe now is the time to start thinking about chickens. That is definitely something that we used to use up the spent grain because there's a lot of it. And as somebody who is trying to reduce waste and really use up what we have, like I really irked at the thought of just tossing it into the trash can. And it's not something that I necessarily wanted to just put into the compost either because, it can attract rodents and stuff. But the chickens made short work of that. And even when we had quite a lot of grain, there was, because we only had 6 chickens, so £10 of grain is a lot for them. We could put it into a bag or into several bags and then toss it in the freezer. And then during summer, we could just kind of give them like these frozen grain blocks that they, it would defrost during the day, and then give them grains to kind of work at too. So that's another top tip if you live somewhere that is warm. Let's talk about feed storage. I now keep everything feed wise in metal trash cans. It doesn't matter if it's the dog's kibble or it's chicken feed. And this is to avoid attracting rats, mice, and bigger predators. Metal trash cans also help to keep the feed fresher. And if you store it somewhere cool and dry, it can help to reduce spoiling, especially, if you've got like sacks of feed and rain gets in there, it can go moldy. And like I said earlier, you don't want to be giving your chickens moldy food because it can kill them. But a trash can is going to help keep the rodents out of the feed. So, you don't want to be feeding the local wildlife. You want that to be going towards your actual chickens, right? There's a lot of money that's going into these. Having chickens is not necessarily going to be cheaper than buying eggs at the grocery store. Let's be honest about this. But they are going to be tasting better than the ones that you get from the grocery store. But let's talk about how messy chickens are when they eat, because I've had chickens that seem to pretty much jump in the feed. And I had one of those tall metal feeders where it was like a skinny chimney in it, and then like a round kind of trough plate thing at the bottom where it would feed into. And there was always like one bird that would be jumping in at the top and pretty much rejoicing in the feed, like really rolling around in it and thoroughly enjoying all of that bounty that was there, and would throw it to every corner of the coop, the wall of the run. Like, it would go everywhere. I don't feed in the coop, like inside the main coop. I want my birds to get out into the world, so I would always feed in the run. Like, I want to avoid attracting rodents into the coop. I don't want, rats and mice trying to snuggle up with the hens. So the feed goes in the run. I also don't leave the feed out all day anymore either. When I was working, there wasn't anybody at home, we would leave the feed out. But then we found that we were basically feeding a couple of rats, which wasn't great. And that's not what we want to do. So the type of feeder that we're using also makes a big difference. So what we're doing now is we're not leaving the feed out all day for them to just kind of, self-serve throughout the day. It's out for a period of time. Then we put the feed away back in the feed store, and then we bring it out again for the birds to have some more before they head to bed for a final feed. I'm also not filling up the container all the way. I'm trying to gauge how much feed the birds are actually needing and using. And I'm actually looking at the feed guide on the feed this time, which is something that I haven't done before. But I wanted to really kind of see, how much of the bird's actually using, so I can gauge to, how many scoops that I'm putting into that feeder. So there's less waste that's going everywhere. The majority of the food is in this metal trash can, and it's only being pulled out in the right quantities that they need. It's working for us. The chickens clean up a bunch of the feed that they throw around the place, so there's less, stuff that's there on the ground to be luring in rodents. And like I said, the type of feeders make a huge difference, and I would really love to hear from you if you use some no waste chicken feeders, or if you built your own. I would love to hear about it in the Facebook group, so please tell me about it and put some pictures up there of your low or no waste chicken feeders. I'd love to see them. Let's talk about garden scraps, because we talked obviously about chicken scraps, but there's also things from your garden that you can give your hens. Dandelions, thinnings from beets or lettuces, collard leaves or other leafy greens. I'm sure my birds will be getting to hunt through some scraps from the garden, ones that have got like a lot of aphids on them, or caterpillars, hornworms. Oh my gosh, if we find more tomato hornworms this year, I don't know, I'm really curious to see like if that changes how the eggs will be the next day. Like, I'm really curious, because those tomato hornworms are, they're huge. They could be like the size of your arm. They're massive. But what I'm saying is there's lots of critters and things out in the garden, and just like with chicken scraps, there's things that the chickens should not be given from the garden. So let's take the hornworms, for example. I would give them the hornworms, but I'm not going to give them the tomato leaves and branches, or potato plants or eggplant leaves and stuff. They're often hand in hand with being poisonous. So I don't want to be giving those to my chickens. Definitely do your research before giving your chickens things from the garden or having them free range in the yard. There might be some plants that can make them really sick if they eat them, and they don't know not to eat it. So you're going to need to create some kind of barrier to protect your chickens from getting into something that they shouldn't. So again, do a bit of research and find out if you can give your chickens something, if you want to give them something out of the garden. and how you can, protect some of those plants that they can't get from your chickens if you're free ranging. Sprouting grains is kind of fun, and it's an interesting fodder system. You can make these sprouted grain mats, and you can give them to your chickens in the cold winter months. And you kind of do that by soaking grains and letting them sprout and then letting them grow a bit in a tray, so all those roots kind of knot together and create these mats. So you have like this grassy stuff on the top and then all these roots on the bottom. And they can be quite easy and fast to set up. So people that I've seen use them, they basically are using those like seed starting trays, and they're just filled with these like sprouting grains and stuff. I think I saw somebody that was using like scratch grain, and they sprouted all that, let it grow a bit, and then they just kind of took this mat out and then threw it in the coop, and the chickens went nuts for it. So that is definitely one way to have your chickens running to you in the middle of winter. And given how long winter seems to be here in Maine, that's definitely something that I'm quite interested in doing, particularly if I've got old seeds for things that I could sprout, because the germination rate on it's not very good. Since moving, I know the seed hasn't been treated or anything, so is sprouting it an option to use it up? There's a lot of a lot of things ticking over in my brain about that, and having fodder systems. So I would love to know from you, if you're using a fodder system, how that works for you, and any tips. So this last tip for reducing feed costs isn't going to resonate with everyone, since it is dealing with unproductive birds. So I'm giving you a warning now, so you can finish listening right now. It's okay. I'm not a fan of surprises, so you can go ahead and turn off the podcast now and get busy in your garden. Don't worry, I'll be here with another episode, and we can still be friends. It's okay. So I want to talk about the unproductive birds. The last thing that we can do to cut feed costs is to remove the unproductive members of the flock. Now, that might be rehoming them as a pet, also known as a soft cull for some people, or just rehoming them generally. Or you can do a hard cull and they become dinner. And it's a really hard choice to make for many homesteaders. And certainly members of our own families have probably had to make that choice, in the past. Maybe a distant past for you. But, there are people, and have been people, who have chosen to eat the unproductive birds in the flock. Certainly, like my great grandmother would have definitely made that choice to have just, eaten the unproductive birds. Chickens lay for a number of years, but they're most productive during the first 2, maybe 3 years. But a chicken itself can live, for 7, 8, or even more years. And for those of you that are wanting to return to your roots or old-fashioned homesteading, then the stew pot has to be really, considered. Now, we have a plan on our homestead, and that is the feeding the family option. We use everything from that bird, and we're raising meat birds anyway. So that probably shouldn't have come as a surprise for you if you're still with me and listening. But we use everything from the bird. So feathers that are suitable to make fishing ties will get put aside. The rest of the feathers and the unusable bits from the bird, they go into the bokashi compost. Things that can become treats or food for the dogs are put aside. The bird itself will cook it, use it. The bones are then made into chicken broth. We'll can that chicken broth, and then those chicken bones are going to go into the bokashi compost that then feeds the garden. Nothing is wasted, whether that is a layer that is no longer laying or an unproductive, or a meat bird that we've raised on pasture. We waste nothing. And I would love to know from you, like, how do you cut the cost of feeding chickens on your homestead? Let me know over in the Facebook group. And until next time, I hope your garden grows beautifully, and I'll see you all next week.